You're listening to the RAD Podcast. Explore wealth.
Different model, a different way of doing business. Parts of the country 24/7, 7 days a week. I was just done with the gurus. If somebody gives me $30,000 to $50,000, that should be a lifetime relationship for Podcast Nation. Because if you give me that kind of money, I have an obligation, in my opinion, a responsibility to see you succeed.
Well, hello everyone. I got Rachel Nabers here, good friend and serious entrepreneurial success woman, just kills it, and her company is growing incredibly fast. And I think some of our clips from our last podcast have been some of the most popular downloads. Rachel, when we got into kind of like world currencies and we got into crypto and some of the different things, and I know that goes, some away from your core business, but you're a master when it comes to knowing certain things. So all right, enough talking. So like I said, you had some cool artwork in the back, and so my first question is, right off the bat, like, what do you do to stay, just in that mind, in that state, where you're growing? Because when you're growing, you have no choice but to be in state. I know you told me earlier you guys have gone, to 20 plus, employees, and from, a handful of employees in the last year. And I mean, you were always a great business before, so you must be going like crazy growth right now.
We are growing really quickly right now. We're so glad to have new team members on with us. It's always really inspiring to have people join in on your mission. So I'm just really, really, really blessed and really happy right now.
What about culture? Like, I mean, for me, because we're growing fast too, it's holding on to culture, building, reigniting new culture. What are you guys doing?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. So, especially in a post-COVID world, so all of our team members are 100% remote independent contractors. So I know that term gets thrown around a lot now, like company culture, but I think it's really important to find a way to build company culture, especially if you have a completely remote or virtual team, which we do. So, we have regular meetings with one another within various departments, and of course, our all hands meetings. And we just try to be really supportive of one another. We use Slack as our internal team communication. And I created something a little bit silly about 6 months ago. It's a Slack channel that we call the virtual water cooler. And it's where everybody gets to come and hang out and talk about non-work stuff. So this is where you post cat videos and pictures of you're decorating your Christmas tree or what you had for dinner, and people can tell jokes, and it's just a really nice place for everybody to get to let their hair down and just get to hang out with one another in the work setting, but still be able to really create those tenets of company culture. And I mean, a lot of what we do to build a company culture happens in our onboarding when we bring new team members on, but it's also reiterated in all of our company meetings or our department meetings. And there's a few tenets that are really important to us. So first is to operate as a team and a championship team, a dream team. We're all in this to be on mission and to serve our clients, to serve our customers. We're all laser focused on that mission. And that means, when you're on a team, you pass the ball to this teammate, you expect them to pass the ball to you. There's cooperative, collaborative work together. But along with that, we also really try to cultivate and want to attract people to our team that have a radical sense of personal responsibility, that claim ownership of their work, that take ownership of their feelings, that take ownership of excellence in what they do. And I think when you can cultivate people that have a radical sense of personal responsibility and then get them to be able to play team and help them to play team with one another and let them have fun a little bit and let their hair down at the virtual water cooler, it turns out to be just really awesome. I mean, you're hanging out with these people for 40 plus hours a week. So our belief is that they should be people you actually enjoy spending time with. And we do. We all really like each other.
So, as we've jumped to like 60 plus people, right? I find that like there's, as a CEO, you hear like every piece of drama, right? You deal with every piece of like major drama, like people are going through and stuff. So there's like, for us, there's a couple of things like we've tried to like key in on, right, with our people for cultural like intensity, right? Support, cultural background. So like health issues, like we try to key in on like when we see people that have gone through stuff like one gal has a slip disc on her back, and another one fell and hurt her knee, and just COVID, right? And things that have happened. We've had, in the last year, I don't know, a dozen people, catch COVID. Thank God they're all real healthy. And, it's interesting because we try to dive into those moments, right? And create that extra background. But it's like being listening, right? Being aware of what is going on in their lives. And sometimes it's hard too, though, because some of your strongest people don't tell you anything, right? They won't tell you when, there's stuff that's going on in their lives and stuff. And so that's one of the things we've done too. I really like the ownership part because like I'm like literally like 19 direct reports, right? And like 14 or 15 of those are leaders that manage other people. And then I get to myself where like I have to have people that can own their universe. Because if they can own their universe, then I can impact their universe. I don't have to control, direct, lead their universe, right? And I can free up mind space. And like I work with like in a domino effect, so everything's the next domino. And so if a domino doesn't fall, then I'm stuck, figuring that domino out,
right?
In different things too. So that's some of the things we're doing culturally. I mean, we did all the like important things. Like, are you guys doing healthcare for your people and that kind of stuff too? Like we stepped in COVID just to be competitive out here was to recruit really good people. We didn't feel like we could be competitive in recruiting the best people without, those help, without offering, some extended stuff from a healthcare standpoint.
All of our team are independent contractors.
So, I got you. So you're 100% independent. Gosh, I can't even imagine like if we counted independent with all the construction people in our business and stuff, how deep that would go. What do you think, like where the world's headed in the next 2 years, like with inflation economically, like what are you preparing for? What are you planning for?
I think that I think we're going to see persistent inflation. I think this could potentially be strong inflation. I don't know if we'll necessarily go into a hyperinflationary scenario, but there's a non-zero chance of hyperinflation, let's put it that way. But I think that we will continue to see persistent inflation, and I think that we will continue to see strong inflation moving forward. I just don't know really what levers the government has to pull at this time. Previously raising interest rates was definitely an option. The trouble with that now is that if the government decides to raise interest rates, which historically would bring inflation back down, the debt that we have, our debt to GDP ratio right now is something like 123 or 122%. So raising interest rates would cause the debt service payments to take up a huge chunk of our GDP, and that would necessitate that we would have to cut major programs, cut spending in major programs, social spending and things like that. And I think that a lot of people will push back on that. So I'm not sure really if the Fed has the option to raise interest rates as aggressively as they might otherwise need to in order to curb sort of this runaway inflation. And what kind of happens is when people start to see inflation, price inflation specifically in consumer goods and things like that, they go, oh no, and they start to buy more because they're afraid that the price is going to go up in the future, but then that causes increased demand, and then that causes the prices to start to increase, and you get this sort of inflation spiral of people buying because they think the price is going to go up in the future, so they buy more now, but then that pushes the price up. And I don't think that we're going to see that come down anytime soon. So it's a concern.
So for me, like we experienced a lot of high interest rates when the pandemic first hit. So as an investor, as a real estate investors, right, we were facing anywhere even from 10 all the way up to 15% interest rates on stuff that typically right now we're doing 4 and 5% interest rates, right? And so with our returns, it impacts, but it doesn't de-escalate our ability to make money. I don't know that they can raise, like, you think there's a lot of variable rates, and that's where it's going to affect the debt so much because people, as if they raise interest rates, it's going to hit variable rates, and there's that much variable rate debt that's out there?
I do think that that's part of it, and I think that even the interest rates on things like bank accounts are going to go start, or right now are at zero and have been at
Mhm.
zero for many, many years. So when those rates start to go up, then that's going to also then affect um, bonds and things as well.
Okay. Interesting. People loved the stuff you shared with crypto the last times, and some of the things like where do you think crypto's at in the last year, the last 2 years, not the last year, the last 90 days, the last 6 months, because crypto changes so fast.
It really does. And I was trying to remember what the price of crypto was even when we did our last conversation. Um, I know it wasn't $57,000 and or 58 or 56 or whatever it is right now. So I think there's definitely a significant portion of the crypto community that is wondering if crypto is going to hit, or if Bitcoin will hit $100,000 by the end of the year. I don't necessarily think that we're going to see that, um, but there's there's a model that many crypto investors follow called stock to flow that's released by Plan B. It's a pseudonymous name. He was, I believe, an investment analyst or an economist. And what he basically talks about is he looks at the moving average of the price of Bitcoin and then charts where he believes that the price of Bitcoin will go to. And historically, the stock to flow model has really held up from a pricing perspective. And what the stock to flow model says is that Bitcoin will be worth $1 million per Bitcoin by 2025. Now that might sound like, wow, that's crazy, but really that's 16x from here at $56,000, $57,000. The price of Bitcoin has gone up 16x just in the last year. So to do another jump of that 16x and hit $1 million per Bitcoin, especially in the next 2 to 3 years, I don't think is out of the realm of possibility. So if you're new to the crypto space, if you haven't invested in crypto before, you have to be ready to um, weather
Endure.
ups and downs, right? Yeah, it's an incredibly volatile asset class. It has spectacular rises and corrections. So it is a risk on asset. It's something you need to be aware of emotionally before you get into crypto. But I think it can serve a powerful role in your portfolio as a hedge asset as well.
And I think what you get into too is people want to trade it, right? Like day trade it or trade it back and forth, and they want to try and capitalize upon the rise and the fall. And I always fear for people that aren't elite at it, right? If you're not an expert at it, if you're not, amazing at it, then you could really struggle, right? And I know that there's like paper
Sure.
trading and there's other ways to get experience and practice in those kind of things because like for us we bought our first bitcoins a decade ago, and we hang on to them and enjoy the ride. But for an average person to say I'm going to buy something at $56,000 and say I'm going to hold on to it, and I know that people can buy portions of bitcoins and those kind of things now, so then it becomes challenging. But my marketing team, they're constantly posting things for opinions or for voices, right? And so I was reading Dave Ramsey, and I remember like when I first started, my financial journey 15 years ago, he was one of the experts that I paid attention to his stuff, right? Because I loved his emergency plan stuff, right? Setting aside, the right money for emergency stuff. But there wasn't really much else on his plan that I was, really agreeable with, right? And like one of the things he talks about is not investing in Bitcoin or not putting money into Bitcoin and those kind of things. And I think it's, kind of a different way of thinking. He also said that real estate should only be paid for 100% free and clear, which goes against everything that I believe. So I'm just curious, like when you see different people out there, like speaking their financial stuff into the world, like how do you take it in, or what do you advise people? Like, yeah, that's better. How do you advise people, like when they're taking in all of the different information, like how do they discern?
It's a good question. So, well, first of all, I'm not an investment advisor. I'm not
Yeah.
a financial advisor. So I don't give people advice, but I do greatly believe in educating and empowering yourself so that you can make the right decisions in accordance with whatever your risk tolerance is and where you are at different stages of your life. Someone that's listening to the podcast that's 22 years old, that's earning a strong living, is going to have different needs and a different financial outlook than someone that's maybe 79 years old and no longer working. So people have different needs at different stages of their life, of course. But The thing with any news today, including crypto news, is it's trying to separate the signal from the noise, and there's a lot of noise. So what I think some people do is they just start going down the rabbit hole of crypto Twitter, and there's a lot of people that know what they're talking about on crypto Twitter, and there's a lot of people that have no idea what they're talking about. I think that there are some really valuable voices to listen to. Actually, hold on, I have a quick book I can share. So this is a great place to start. The Bullish Case for Bitcoin by Vijay Boyapati. I think listening to anything that Balaji Srinivasan has to say, you can follow him on Twitter at, I think it's Balaji S. He's a genius, has a lot of wonderful things to say. Michael Saylor, the CEO of MicroStrategy, has been a very vocal proponent for Bitcoin, holds Bitcoin on their corporate balance sheet. They have actually hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin on their corporate balance sheet. And they're a publicly
3
traded
billion,
company.
right?
Yeah, it's incredible. Um, Bukele, who's the president of El Salvador, the first nation that has now accepted Bitcoin as legal tender. It's just, you can really start to separate the signal from the noise a little bit easier these days. And what we're seeing is that legacy financial institutions, your Goldman Sachs, your JP Morgan, who may have historically poo-pooed something like Bitcoin or crypto, are now having their own trading desks or their own digital asset councils where this is a big arm of their research. So crypto is here to stay. It is going to be a part of the financial conversation moving forward. So I think that educating yourself and empowering yourself to decide then what your risk exposure should be to holding crypto in your portfolio is really important. I don't know what the right amount of Bitcoin or other crypto for you to hold is, but it's not zero.
I agree. I agree with you. Like we have gotten deep because we have so many regulations with what we can invest in and can invest in and stuff. And so we've been able to create side pockets with our funds and be able to buy different crypto and smaller portions to our full percentage of our fund, which is real estate. But I think having that balance is unique because you need balance. And I think that comes
Definitely.
with the information you take in, right? It's very easy to get trapped into a left or a right, echo chamber if you're consuming media and different things, and you got to be able to hear the difference between biased one-sided opinion and truth. And that's I think a lot of challenge for people is they have to seek real answers. Like for me, when I say someone who's just beginning, right, and just like Rachel, right, I'm not a financial advisor, but we're both fairly successful people. We're both fairly wealthy people. Or I should say we're both successful, both wealthy in our own regards. And at the same time, we also work with a lot of people who are figuring out what to do financially, what to do with their money. And Rachel's really a big part of her life and business is about helping people protect, what is theirs. And so for me, I constantly look at what is the right advice in the different phases within people's lives. So like for me, one of the things is I always believe when somebody's just beginning, people are always like, well, you got to start investing somewhere, right? You got to invest that $100 or $1,000, and this is kind of like different than the mainstream opinion. My opinion is your original money invested in you, right? Like expand your ability to earn. Because I think $1,000 is unlikely ever to turn into $1 million, no matter how good the returns and the interest are. But if you can take $1,000 and somebody can expand their ability to earn by $10,000 in the next year, right? You've expanded yourself by 1,000% return. And so, like for me, that original investment is always into like figuring out what you are, right? And what you're capable of doing, but also figuring out what your best genius is, because my best genius is real estate. There'll never be a day in my life that it's going to be crypto. Like I'm never going to give out crypto advice. I'm never going to tell people to do, there was a time last year where I was hearing different things where I, advised, a lot of our investors, hey, it might be a time if you're going in and out to come out for a little bit before you go back in. And I was lucky enough to be right for once, right? When it comes to crypto. But it's interesting when you tell people about like self-discovery, what would you tell them for entrepreneurs, right? For people who, or investors, what would you tell them like personal self-discovery? What would you tell them to start from?
Well, I think that you really touched on something great, which is that investing can only take you so far, and it can take you really far, but it can only take you so far. But business ownership and entrepreneurship is a massive lever to be able to pull in your life, as far as from a wealth creation standpoint. And, when you are making yourself more valuable, then that helps to increase your ability to earn value in the form of dollars. I think a really great book that I love is called Mindset by Carol Dweck. And she's a psychologist, and she talks about the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And one thing that I've noticed among a lot of very successful entrepreneurs is they have a growth mindset. If they fail, they pick themselves right back up. They keep moving forward. If they encounter an obstacle, their response is, I love a good challenge. And then they find a way to overcome it. And if you are either beginning in the entrepreneurship game or you've been a business owner for a long time, inevitably you're going to encounter challenges. You're going to encounter obstacles. Was it Bruce Lee that says, fall down 7 times, get back up 8? I think that persistence and that growth mindset is one of the most powerful tools for entrepreneurs, because that doesn't matter what field you're in, doesn't matter what business structure you're in, doesn't matter who your clients are or what you're serving. If you're dedicated to constantly improving yourself, eliminate the victim mentality. Derek Sivers, a wonderful writer, he has a book called, gosh, I hope I don't misquote it, something like It's All My Fault. And it's this idea of radical ownership of, what if everything that went wrong in my business, I could say, it's my fault, it's my fault, it's my fault, instead of passing the buck on to someone else. Then I have ownership to try to find a solution to that problem. So if you are an entrepreneur, if you're a business owner out there, then that radical acceptance, it's your fault. It's your fault, and that means it's also your ability to be able to change it, and connect that with that growth mindset, that constantly looking for new challenges, new obstacles so that you can overcome them. That's what I think really separates the winners.
Yeah, we had some interesting conversations, in our offices, recently, and it's fascinating as people go through these different growths. Like for me, I always see growth as, it's kind of like a city with the lights completely turned off, like the power's gone out, and then as the power comes on, you see each new building, each new block with the power going on. And so for me, I constantly feel like the power to the next building, the next block is being turned on, and like the more blocks I turn on, the more of the world I see that's turned off, right? And so it's like the open vision of, like, I see the next that's closed every time I open the new block, or the new obstacle or the new vision. And it's kind of one of the ways I look at life. And so we were in staff meetings recently, and one of the things we ran into is we were doing, there was a correction in the meeting with speed, right? I always think time lag is a killer of business. I think it's one of the biggest, things that can keep a business from being successful or keeping a business from growing.
Timeline, did you say?
Time lag, yeah.
Time
Just
lag,
time lag,
okay.
right? Like the time between a proposal and a decision, or the time between a decision and implementation, or the time between implementation and reality. And so we were talking, about time lag in that situation, and my team member, he started to get a little bit defensive, right? And he got to a place where, like, he, was, I could see the frustration, like the physical frustration in that moment. And I just, what I said to him was, like, in this situation, there's no need for defensiveness, right? This is us just figuring out what the next step in the process is, what the next piece that we need to go into in order to not have this lag, not to have these pieces, in the future. And so as businesses, oftentimes you have the present action of today, and then you have the layers that are being built towards the future and towards beyond. And so that's really can be challenging for some people to balance within both, but not everybody's supposed to balance within both. And so for me, like from a growth standpoint, I always have the now, which is the health and the healthy mindset of, like, what you and I are, functioning on a day-to-day basis. But then it's like, what are the long-term growth? What's the long-term focus, and those kind of things for me too, I think is big. I always tell people too, like, when people, like, are putting themselves out, like, as idols, like as a, like, the only answer, the only, like, this is the only way. and this is the only way to grow, or this is the only way to be, or this is the only way to handle money, or this is the only way of anything, right? I always tell people those as they're trying to discern between great information and information that they need to take what it is makes sense for them, right? Is staying away from those kind of false. Anybody who thinks they're the only answer or all the answer is leading people astray or leading people down a bad path. And I'll even say with media too that like when you're listening to media, when there's not a dual argument, then people, like if people can't see both sides of every single situation, it can be, you know, really challenging for you. When you look at issues, do you try to weigh both, like both the yin and yang of an argument, even if you have an opinion about one side of it?
I do. I do. I'm a big fan of playing the devil's advocate. And, a phrase that I really gravitate to is strong opinions loosely held. So I will come right out of the gate with a strong opinion. But if you give me a viable counterpoint to it, then I'll abandon that opinion if I need to and then pick up the new one. So I have strong opinions loosely held, and I do like to try to see the other side in arguments. Um, I mean, I was on the debate team in high school and college, so I think that's just something that I naturally gravitate to, is trying to poke holes in different things, and I think that that can be really helpful. Um, I might get this wrong, but I know that Walt Disney, he had his team in different groups. There were the dreamers, the cynics. There's another one. I'm totally going to get it wrong for the people out there that know it. But the dreamers and the cynics, the jobs of the dreamers are just to come up with all of the ideas. Just let your mind flow. And the job of the cynic is to try to poke holes in all of the dreamers' ideas so that they could come to that middle ground of what can we actually deliver that's going to be amazing for the park goers, for our movie viewers, etc. So I often, if I'm in a conversation with someone and they're playing the dreamer, I really like to be the cynic, and I like to try to come in and poke holes in the argument because I want to see that it can be defended and make sure that we're shoring up weaknesses.
Yeah, I like to argue against my own argument, like to figure out in my own head. It's in for the holidays, right? We had an interesting, spirited Thanksgiving at my house. So we had a good, great conversation about government control and gun control and vaccine control and those kind of things. And I definitely have a voice and an opinion about each of those subjects. And as people started to discuss them or argue them in different ways, I just was asking, like, well, what are your, like, where does that come from? Like, where does your opinion come from? Or where does your, like, you have this voice about what you believe is right and wrong, like, but where does that come from? And because to just have an opinion about something, to me, isn't acceptable. And that is really challenging for people that have really strong opinions about something, but have never gone through the process of saying, I backed up my opinion this way, I backed up my opinion that way. So I always find, like, I love to source, like, where does the opinion come from, or is it just something you think?
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever see the Joe Rogan where him and Candace Owens talked about her view on climate control and different things?
No, I love the Joe Rogan experience, but I haven't seen that episode.
And there's a really good clip where Candace Owens is talking about a little bit about climate change, right? And her opinion, and then Joe kind of comes at her a little bit, and he's like you're an influencer. Like, if you're gonna have that opinion, you need to be able to back it up. You got to go and have answers. Like, I saw that recently, and so, like, for me, like, more of things that I have opinions about, I started diving deeper into, like, what is my backbone behind that? Like, how strong is my backbone, or is it just an opinion that was built by, the political atmosphere from growing up, or the political atmosphere from different people, or the relationship, with different aspects, or is it my own opinion that I've truly formulated from a deep dive and research and stuff? With you guys growing so fast, like, how much information are you collecting, like, for growth, or are you sometimes, or do you just say, I've collected to this point, right now I'm going to focus more on growth than I am on collecting more information about growth with what you guys are going through?
Um, I'm not sure I totally understand the question. I mean, we're always doing research when it comes to
But how
investment.
I more mean, like, how you're going to do it. Like, so for me, there's times like when we go through rapid growth phases, we'll build a plan, and it's not like I don't stop collecting information in the world, but like getting outside consulting or getting coaching or getting advice, like I'll make a decision to say, okay, here's how we're gonna go, and once we've made that finite plan, we're gonna implement versus focusing on getting more, or is it nonstop for you even while you're growing and stuff?
Well, I think that we have a plan on how we're growing, so that's something that we're implementing. So we're not slowing that down for, we're open to opinions, but we're not seeking right now uh, to deviate from the growth
From the
plan.
plan, yeah. Yeah, we recently went through one. So, like, if you've ever heard of an opportunity zone fund,
Hmm.
so we recently, had a lot of our investors kind of hit us with that hard. Like, you guys have to have an opportunity zone fund because they're already investing with us in different ways. And so we did a pretty hardcore pivot is in September of opening a brand new fund, which doesn't usually happen overnight. That's all opportunity zone
It's a great way
based
to
and stuff.
avoid 1031s.
It's a great way to avoid 1031s. And but that deep dive, was a pivot in the middle of staying congruent
Got
with
it.
the plan, staying congruent with the plan. How do you not get deviated from where you and Jeff's long term vision is?
Well, I think sticking with the plan just for the sake of sticking with the plan is, sometimes the death kiss for a high growth startup. You have to know when the time is right to pivot. So that's something that Jeff, our CEO, is always keeping a finger on the pulse of the market, on how the organization is growing, to know if and when there's time to pivot. But I think that when you're mission driven, which we are, and I know that you are, then your mission is still to empower investors. That might look like an ozone fund. It might look like a different type of, maybe it's a tax lien basket fund, maybe it's doing a side pocket of crypto, but you're still not deviating from that mission to empower your investors and help them build long-term wealth. So I think that as long as you're clearly connected with your mission, any kind of little, detours that you're taking are still moving you towards that end goal.
Now, when Biden came out with the potential executive order, right, for changing, what a qualified investment is and stuff like with IRAs and those kind of things, was that just as impactful in the 401k industry? Did you guys, I mean, how did you guys feel when
The
that?
Build Back Better bill, the reconciliation bill,
I
is
think
that?
so, yeah.
Yeah. So, that was, yeah, originally the original language of this bill that was called the Build Back Better bill. So there was the infrastructure bill, which was a 2,700 page bill that nobody read, that started out, I think, at 3 trillion, then it went down to 2 trillion, then it was 1.7 when it finally passed. And then, in addition to the infrastructure bill, there was a social spending bill, also known as the reconciliation bill, also known as the Build Back Better bill. A lot of elements of the Build Back Better bill are great, and they're really attempting to embetter our world with things like universal pre-K and social programs. A lot of those, there's a strong proponency for those social programs. What weaseled its way into the bill that I didn't really understand was a lot of provisions that were going to be very detrimental to IRAs. So, for example, one of the provisions was going to eliminate the ability for an IRA account holder to invest in anything that required you to be an accredited investor in a private investment. So, for example, any real estate fund, any real estate investment trust, any hedge fund, crowdfunding deals, private equity, private debt. If these are private deals, and when I say private, I mean they're not traded, they're not a publicly traded security. If these are private deals that require you to be an accredited investor in order to invest, this bill was going to take that ability away from your IRA to do the investment. This would have been incredibly detrimental because a massive part of the self-directed IRA space is exactly this, is letting IRA investors invest in things like apartment syndications, hedge funds, real estate investment funds, crowdfunding deals, private equity, venture capital, angel investing, etc. So the first iteration of the Build Back Better bill was going to be very detrimental. Fortunately, that provision got thrown out and it has not come back in, thank goodness. Another IRA provision that crept into the bill was saying that they were going to close the backdoor Roth conversion. In other words, they want to eliminate the ability for anyone to convert pre-tax or after-tax IRAs to Roth IRAs. Part of the reason behind this is they said they want to avoid, people, billionaires trying to game the system. The sort of little story behind this is Peter Thiel, one of the original PayPal mafia. He made an investment of some private stock with a Roth IRA that then became worth billions of dollars. So he's got a lot of money in a Roth IRA. And what the IRS is, or the government is essentially saying, Congress is essentially saying, is that's not fair. People shouldn't just be allowed to be billionaires for no reason. And they're trying to, say that they're closing this backdoor, the ability to invest these, do these Roth conversions, because they want to make it, more fair, a more even playing field. Unfortunately, though, what I think is going to happen is the opposite. It's usually normal middle-class Americans that do these backdoor Roth conversions or a Roth IRA conversion. Why? So that they can grow some of their wealth tax-free. When you have money in a Roth IRA, you don't have to pay taxes on those distributions. You can pass that Roth IRA down to your heirs. There's no required minimum distributions. It's a really nice way to be able to grow generational wealth for normal working class and middle class Americans. Unfortunately, this part of the provision is still in the Build Back Better bill. The bill has passed in Congress. It's going through the Senate right now. I'm hoping they'll take a big black marker and cross that provision right out. I think people should be allowed to convert their funds to Roth if they want. That is their sovereign choice. It is a taxable event. Remember, if you have a traditional IRA, let's say you have 100 grand in there, and you decide you want to convert that 100,000 to a Roth IRA, you have to pay taxes on that conversion. The IRS is making money on you on that conversion. So I think that that is a dangerous provision that's still in the bill. I'm hoping will be X'd out once it goes through the Senate. And I would encourage people to reach out to your senator, let them know that you don't want that provision in the bill.
I mean, I think there's, hundreds of millions of Americans, right? Whether it's today or 10 or 20 or 30 years from now, right? That a provision like that literally will be a big part of stealing their retirement.
100% agree.
And the government has proven, like with Social Security, is not a good retirement for folks, right? Like it's not enough money for people to live, to have a continued lifestyle. It's turned into, like when I was a kid, Social Security was people who lived off of their Social Security were living.
Yeah,
right?
They still had a pretty normal life.
That was the extent of it. But in today's world, Social Security, people can't live off of that. It becomes a supplement or an addition to what they've had to figure out in order to retirement. And they certainly can't sustain a continued lifestyle, right, through Social Security, because even at its maximum highest benefit, doesn't even meet, our minimum standard of living in the United States. And for, more than 70% of our country, you can't even, like, it's not even a base level living, right? Not even the medium, not even anywhere close to medium standard of income. And so, like, if people don't control their own retirements, if they can't, I get that when people need help, you help them. And that's, I think, what Social Security is, right?
Sure.
For people that have no other option. But I think that's really what Social Security is it's a supplement to people that have no other option. Whereas, your average American needs the ability to grow their money, because right now, if your money doesn't grow in an inflation world or a hyperinflation world, you might lose 10, 15, even 20%, right, of your value of your money. And if you're stuck investing into only a few chosen, right, investments, because that's what it becomes to me, is if they limit IRAs or an investor's ability to invest that way, they start to trim down and they start to try and control what you're allowed to invest in, which is one of my frustrations from the beginning for us, is why we wanted to open to non-accredited, because I also don't think I think it's unfair that non-accredited are very limited in what they're allowed to or they're not allowed to invest in too. Like, that was one of my great frustrations when we first opened our first funds, was we're so limited in the amount of people that were non-accredited that we were allowed to invest with us. Became a frustration. That's why we spent, $1 million and all of the work to become who we became, with RAD being a Reg A and all of the red tape, so we could allow all of the non-accredited investors to invest with us, but they're still incredibly limited, like even with the rules that they're allowed to do with us. And so I just think when you allow the government to control money, what have they proven to us that they've, like, where has our government ever proven they're successfully controlling money? I guess, there's where my frustration comes into. And I know you're about to share, and I got on a rant. So,
Well, no, it's interesting that you then, tie it back into inflation and strong inflation and maybe even hyperinflation. Another provision that's still in the bill today as it is written is that there's a cap on these IRAs and Roth IRAs. And if you go over that cap, then you are required to distribute the money out of the IRA or the Roth IRA. So now, not only is this bill saying we're not going to let you move the money around or invest it how you choose or decide where and how to convert it, but also if you have too much money in your IRA, we're going to force you to take it out, and now it becomes taxable income and loses its, or it would lose its tax deferred status if it otherwise would have been allowed to remain in the retirement plan.
I mean, to me, if you want to tax billionaires, right? But I also don't have like some type of ill-gotten like hatred towards billionaires, like, because I'm like, man, that's freaking amazing. Like, I think people who've built great fortunes or great wealth have created some of the greatest things on the planet, right? So
and they also
like,
tend to employ tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people.
And so like what they actually produce with money is just so much more, right, than handing the money off to a government where like the endless debate of what to do with money and the inefficiency of money is because, like, I think most politicians' bottom line isn't to say, hey, let's go make the government successful, right? It's like, hey, what's my priority? And so they're trying to figure out what is their initiative or their priority versus what the right decision to make this program or this thing the most successful possible. And so the money has never fixed our government. But we wouldn't have two, private space programs, right, if it wasn't for billionaires, right? We wouldn't have, the alternative energy, right, if it wasn't. There's just so many different things there. And so that I, whether you call it FOMO, maybe that's not the right word, the envy of wealth is very challenging to me, because I think when I was a kid, because I grew up poor, I think I had an envy of wealth. I would see the nice car, or I would see the big house, or I would see the different thing, and I would start to get, I get that there was tension with it, and there was an energy behind it and an understanding of money that I didn't understand growing up, and a frustration. And I think there's where the hatred, or that maybe hatred's not the right word, but the ill opinion, right, of the very, very wealthy is. And at the same time, it's kind of like, as you grow older and you become more successful and you've gone through this journey to become successful, you start to have more of an appreciation or more of a respect, right, for that build, for what it took, for that sacrifice. It's not like Bezos and Musk were billionaires, 10 years ago. And the 20 years they spent before they achieved, mega success, people don't spend enough time comprehending or understanding that, or this personal sacrifice or risk. I don't know how many divorces they've both been through, but they've both been through a few.
Definitely.
She's like, are you going to ask a question?
No, I actually,
Well,
but
what's
I
your
have
opinion on
I
it?
have the hard stop.
Oh, I was thinking we were hard stopping for some reason in my head a little bit longer. So we're good on the hard stop, right? We'll cut that last little piece out, and then the piece where I asked you about healthcare we'll probably cut out too, just because it didn't fit. But thank you for sharing. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, Dutch. It's always awesome to get a chance to chat with you, to see you, and to hear about the good work that you're doing.
Thank you for listening to the RAD Podcast, an exploration of wealth. For more information, please visit our website, www.raddiversified.com. We'd love to hear from you. Please leave us a review and let us know how we're doing.